All right, folks, welcome everybody once again to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. I'm your host, Mike Frank, here with Jamie Uyeyama, and we have Greg Flamong also producing the show for today. Once again, if you have not checked us out on YouTube and you want to watch Power Hour live, you can go to YouTube, search for Irish Sports Daily. We're broadcasting every Monday at 10 p.m. Central. So you can come join the show. There's a chat session there where you can communicate with other Irish fans and talk Irish ball while we're doing the show. We'll also probably put some of your comments up on the show as well and discuss them if we have questions. Also, before we get going, I want to mention our sponsor, which is ESQ Clothing. ESQ has been making the best handmade custom suits, sport coats, tuxedos, and shirts for the last decade. Has been featured on GQ, ESPN, USA Today, and you've seen them dressing your favorite players and coaches. ESQ only gets the best fabric from Italy and England's top mills with over 40,000 fabrics to choose from. You're guaranteed to look your best. Go visit esqclothing.com, book your appointment, and mention ISD. Get 10% off your entire purchase. Once again, that's esqclothing.com. Good morning to all the Irish fans that are on the chat right now. And, Yama, there's a lot to talk about since the last time we had this. We knew that there'd probably be a defensive coordinator hired. I think we've got that squared away. Of course, then we had the, Chad Bowden leaving and going to USC, so we'll get to that, and lots of other things that we're going to talk about today. Let's start off first by let's talk about the Chris Ash hire. And you knew a lot about the X's and O's and that type of thing about things, and I know you'll be doing some stuff on that as the spring nears and certainly the season. But here's the thing. I've done a lot of kind of digging on Chris Ash, and I've kind of went through and really kind of dragged my, went and tried to go deep into my, book of numbers and talk to a lot of different people to get some insight on him. And Yama, the more I learn about this guy, the more excited I am about him. Real football guys that really know football. When you talk to these guys, they say this guy is elite when it comes to X's and O's. He definitely understands what he's doing. He knows how to call a game. Highly, highly respected amongst many people at both the pro and college level. And I even talked to some people who then did more investigation themselves and then came back and said, yeah, the more I ask about this guy, the more people just rave about his potential and what he can do. There's been a lot of questions about why wasn't he hired after this, or after this happened, why didn't he get this job, or whatever the case may be. But as you found out, this is very much an old boys network type of situation, and he kind of attached himself to the hip of Urban Meyer until he got the head coaching job. And when that's your guy and that guy's no longer coaching, it's kind of hard to get the kind of gigs that you want. So I'm very excited about what I hear about this guy. I think he could be even a surprise. I think a lot of people feel like, well, how do you ever replace Al Golden? I agree. That's going to be a very difficult thing to do. But the more I hear about this guy, the more I'm excited about what I hear. Your thoughts here first.
Yeah, I think there's a lot with him where you think that he's very similar to Golden in that way, right? Like you can see the path that Marcus Freeman took to hire Chris Ash, and it was a similar process, I think. He's looking for obviously someone. Ash is known as a guy who is a pretty good recruiter, so I know that is part of it. But that's a small part of what you're asking for when you're hiring a defensive coordinator these days. Obviously, if they were hiring Jim Knowles, that's not like a big part of it either. You are looking for that X's and O's part. You're looking for a guy who can be, elite at that part of it, like game planning, preparation, adjustments, all that kind of thing. And that's what kind of Ash is known for. So I think, yeah, the more that you dig into him and the more that you kind of like learn about him, people kind of have respect of like how he was able to not just get the best out of his groups that he worked with, but how his groups like overall improved, how they like still managed to play good defense despite deficiencies in certain things. And I think that's always something that you're always going to deal with no matter what program you're with, because even Georgia at some points too are going to have like deficiencies in some years, and you have to have a guy who's going to be able to adjust to the talent you have. And I think by all accounts that's something that he does and has done well. So I'm excited to see how it turns out. I think he certainly wasn't someone that, when his name came up, because of him kind of being away from being a coordinator for a while, like there was not as much excitement around it as it would be if he was like when Marcus Freeman got hired, right? Like there wasn't the same amount of buzz, but at the same time, when you like dig into it, you're like, well, he's a pretty good ball coach, and
Yeah.
I think that's what matters. And I think that as long as he kind of fits within the staff, and the other thing is like as of right now, it looks like Mike Mickens is still going to be around, and the rest of the staff is going to be around, and I think that's huge. That is massive for Notre Dame.
That's the interesting thing. When you look at his label or title, it's defensive coordinator. It doesn't say co-defensive coordinator. I thought that was interesting because I think a lot of people felt like, well, maybe if Mike Mickens gets that co-defensive coordinator title, that'll help him stick around. But then you look at the Mickens situation. We'll get to that here in a minute. As far as whether he should stick around, that type of thing. But I think the next question that needs to be asked, Jamie, is how do you handle the defense at this point? We compare him to Golden in that, Golden basically after Miami went into the NFL, and people don't realize, I mean, he coached as a position coach there for essentially 7 years before he took the Notre Dame defensive coordinator job. I mean, it was a long time. He was there with the Lions and then with the Bengals, and then came to take the Notre Dame job. With Ash, it's basically 5 years and he gets the defensive coordinator situation. So there's a lot of comparisons there, but a lot of people are like, well, what happened to him and why wasn't he, elevated to a defensive coordinator position? It's like, well, neither was Al Golden. He was not a defensive coordinator at Detroit, and he was not the defensive coordinator at Cincinnati either. So, you can't get too bogged down into that type of thing. But what I think the big question now is, how do you handle the defense? Is it going to change a lot? Because you don't know how long Chris Ash wants to be here. Does he want to be here forever? Does he want to be here for a year? Does he want to be here for a couple years? And I think that was the thing that was kind of the hard thing with Golden, is we always kind of had this back in our mind situation where we're like, I don't know if he really wants to be here. And when push came to shove, he really didn't in the end. And kind of surprising, because I heard he really liked his time at Notre Dame, but apparently he just prefers the pro schedule, which I totally get. But some guys who've been in the NFL, it's hard to go back to college, especially today with the extended amount of time that's out there, and that you have to really focus on recruiting and all these types of things that you don't in the NFL. And it's a totally different type of environment. And so that's the one thing I wonder about, is how long is Chris Ash here for? Is he another Golden where he's looking for the next big opportunity, whether it be head coaching position or defensive coordinator situation in the NFL? We saw how it worked out with Chip Kelly. We saw how it worked out with Al Golden. A lot of guys want to do that and get it back into the NFL. So that's a situation you want to you get a little bit concerned about. So what do you do on defense? Do you change a lot? Do you let him come in and do something completely different? Do you change your terminology? The reason the defense has been so good the last 3 years is because it's been the same. They haven't had to change all this stuff. So with Marcus Freeman, you're having that conversation with Chris Ash. What is that conversation? What would you do, Jamie? What would you expect, if you're Chris Ash, and what would you expect if you're Marcus Freeman on how you're going to run this defense?
Well, yeah, obviously those are kind of conversations that I'm sure that they had like before he
Before
was even
getting hired,
hired,
yes.
right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, that's got to be super important to them. And I think one of the things that I would be shocked if they drastically changed anything. They will change to what they will tweak stuff. They will move towards a direction that Ash wants. Obviously, I think that you don't hire somebody and say, "Hey, coach somebody else's defense," right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen at all. But I think in regards to like terminology, I think this is just something that people have gotten used to as they've gone, as especially in college football, is that you get hired to a new position and you can change some things in regards to terminology, but you're not going to change too much because then you're going to make it worse for your kids, and then it's going to look worse for you, right? Like
Yeah.
your kid, they're not going to perform as well because you made these changes. Because everything about on defense is like playing fast, like playing smart, making adjustments. If you play slow, you're dead, right? Like you can't do anything on defense. So they're not going to change too much of that. Are they going to do different stuff coverage wise and whatever? Yes, they are going to do some stuff. He's more of like, a quarters coverage guy in general. But like, as Greg and I were talking about last week on Hidden Hustle, like a lot of stuff what you do with like quarters and the type of quarters he does is like a lot of like pattern matching coverage where it's like zone that turns into man. So that part's not going to be too different. And then also too, when you have good, you're not going to be like, hey, Leonard Moore, where you're going to play like a bunch of cover two now, right? Like Leonard Moore can shown that he can play man coverage. You want that guy to play a lot of man coverage, right? So
Yeah.
I think they'll tweak stuff certainly, and obviously there's going to be different things about how they approach, pressures and attacking protections, and that's always going to change, right? But that stuff, it's you're going to do that, but I don't think they're going to overload it with new stuff, because that's also where Marcus Freeman comes into it, because he kind of saw how it went with Golden and how that first year they put in too much, and that was a little bit too much, and then they had to pull back, and then they pulled back, and then they started adding from there. So I think that's something where Marcus Freeman is going to have influence there, because he's seen that. And also too, like Ash has been someone, unlike Golden, he's been someone who's come into programs where he's had to come in and be like new, and he's going to make sure that the guys are doing it right before they're adding more, right? And I think that's something that is going to happen. And in regards to where how long he's going to stay, I mean, you just never know how long anyone's going to stay, right? Like 3 years really for a coordinator is like a long time in today's college football. Like that's just what it is. The days of like Frank Solich being the offensive coordinator in Nebraska for decades, like you just don't see that anymore. I would say with Ash, is there a possibility that he could go be a coordinator at another school somewhere? Maybe he's looking for another opportunity or something, stepping some, maybe, I don't know exactly, what he is, but as of right now, he's got someone, this is a prove it job for him, right? He's got to prove it. And based on how his last head coaching job went, and it didn't go good. And obviously there's other factors that went into it that made it not go good. But I don't think he's going to be like, he's definitely not going to be a name who's going to be a hot head coaching name right now. So I think the way you kind of look at it is you're going to get at least 2 or 3 years out of Ash. And, if it goes well, and then if it goes well, then you just kind of see where it goes from there. Cause you just, excuse me, sorry. You never know just when things are going to open up, because look at Ohio State probably thought, hey, we're pretty set now. They're changing both coordinators. They just lost their offensive line coach. It can go that fast.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a situation where you have I look at the situation at with Ash and I say, look, you mentioned he's a prove it type of guy. He's in a prove it type of situation, but um,
I mean, to get it
he's
to
proven
advance.
yeah. He's proven it before. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh
And
yeah.
I
Yeah.
like the fact that he has the defensive background because you never know what's going to happen with Mike Mickens, and you got to make sure that you have some things taken care of there, and just in case Mike Mickens does decide he wants to leave and go somewhere else. So having that defensive background, I think, was probably important to Marcus Freeman because of the situation. And I think a lot of people are thinking that, like I've seen a lot of people say, well, if Ash stays 2 years, then Mike Mickens can take over, blah, blah, blah. Well, and maybe that's true. Maybe Marcus will have more faith in him at that point to do that. Maybe the program is in a little bit more of a stable situation. But I think his comments when he made them were pretty clear in saying that, I think he's ready for a defensive coordinator position somewhere, and which to me meant not here. The other thing that he said was, we're not, we're not happy to see him go anytime soon. So I think what the comments there were, Mike Mickens needs to go and prove it, just like Chris Ash had to prove it, and all these other guys had to prove it somewhere before they got kind of the big gig. But I don't think you're going to see, and here I say this, the only reason I think you'll see guys leave is if they don't like the situation. Like, Jim Knowles didn't like the situation in Ohio State, right? So he takes a lateral move, and Tom Allen didn't like the situation at Penn State, and he takes a lateral move, so. But I don't think you'll see that happen much at Notre Dame unless there's a situation where Marcus Freeman and he don't get along, which I would, I would doubt that would happen, but you never know. There's all kinds of things that could go on that don't make a lot of sense, but that's the reason they leave. But I think in the end, he's probably here until he has a better opportunity, or he doesn't do the job that he does well. So if he struggles as a defensive coordinator, probably won't be here long either. But I just have a lot of faith in everything that I've heard about him, and I think it's exciting to see what happens with him when you take over such a successful situation. It's hard to come in. Everybody expects you to be the same defense that you were last year, but people need to remember when Al Golden came in, the first year, there were a lot of people who wanted him fired at the end of the year. There were a lot of people saying, I don't know if this is working out. And so it does take time. The good news is I think Notre Dame's offense will be pretty good. But Jamie, you look across college football, it's crazy because, I see some people listing Penn State being, the number one ranked team coming into this. And I'm like, well, they lost both their coordinators. I don't understand how that is. I'm sorry, just the one. Ohio State lost both their coordinators. So and this is just kind of part of football. It just is right now, where guys are just leaving left and right, and you're just going to have to be, if you're successful, you're going to have to be able to replace people and do it well. So we'll have to see what happens. With the Mike Mickens thing, I mean, how do you smooth that out? You know what I mean? If you're Marcus Freeman, how do you smooth that out? You've had a friendship for years. He feels he deserves the job. He was passed over. He's not happy about it, which I don't blame him. Everybody wants a shot, and you think that your best friend would give you a shot, but there's so much at stake that it's really difficult to do that. How do you smooth that out? How do you keep the guy still engaged and doing his job? And what do you say? How do you handle that, Jim?
I mean, I to be honest, Mike, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know how you do it, because obviously there's going to be anyone who's been in a situation where they think they deserve a promotion and then they don't get it, and someone else gets, or someone else comes in. Like, it's rare where there isn't going to be some kind of hurt feelings about it, right? And I think that if there were if there was probably an easy situation for Mickens where he would have transitioned to something else where it was like, hey, this is better than what he's got at Notre Dame. I wouldn't be surprised if he would have taken that, right away, just based on
Yeah,
kind of what happened here.
sure.
But as it stands right now, I think really the only thing is like it's just got to be time and to see where it goes. And I also got to think too, where if Mickens probably, if he is to stay at Notre Dame, kind of like long term, he probably needs to have like a frank conversation with Freeman. And I don't know, they might have already had this conversation, but just like where it's like, hey, is there any chance that I could be promoted to this, or you're never going to give me a chance here if I don't have like,
Yeah,
if I don't have experience being a defensive play caller before that. And if that's not the case, then I think you look at like, I mean, it's a different situation, but Chris O'Leary, who, former Notre Dame safeties coach, went to the Chargers. Well, he went and took, the DC job at Western Michigan for working with former, Notre Dame assistant Lance Taylor, right? So he did that obviously for a reason, because I'm sure he wants to be a defensive coordinator and, probably a head coach one day.
sure.
And that's the path that he's taking to do that. And he thinks that's a better chance of him doing that and getting to be like, a power forward DC somewhere by doing that rather than staying in the NFL and doing it, grinding away there. Right. So everyone's going to have, a different opinion of that and where to go. And obviously Mickens has got to kind of decide where he wants to. But I think of like, so last year, obviously, USC wanted Mickens, right? USC tried to poach him, try to get him to come over there.
Yes.
But you look at USC and they were better on defense and all that. And, hey, they spent a ton of money for Chad Bowden and all that kind of stuff. But like, it's not exactly like a stable situation, right? Like that's not a thing where it's kind of like where Freeman didn't go to LSU when Orgeron, it was like he was on the hot seat. And part of the reason he probably chose to go to Notre Dame was Brian Kelly was definitely more secure in his job. Obviously, Brian Kelly left, but he chose to leave. It wasn't like he was going to get booted out, right? So I think all that kind of plays into it, where a guy decides to go. It's not just about the opportunity. It's about like where that could lead to. So I think you got to kind of just let it play out. Obviously, Notre Dame is better for him staying at Notre Dame and doing like obviously a great job like he has done with the defensive backs. I think it should be pointed out too, not only has he done a great job with the corners, but with the safeties last year too. Like he did an outstanding job with that group as well. So he's someone you want to keep around for a long, long time. You hope that he's going to stay, but he's already been at Notre Dame for 5 years. If he's at Notre Dame for 6 years and he decides to leave to get like another defensive coordinator job or whatever, then I think you can only just kind of wish him luck at that point.
That's what needs to happen. It just does. And for his career too. And I think that it was a situation where my guess is Mickens probably felt like there'd be an opportunity, maybe Golden would look around. Everybody kind of knew that Cincinnati'd probably do something. They're a defensive coordinator. So, if we all knew this, I'm sure he knew it as well, so he probably just was hoping for an opportunity. It didn't materialize. And now you got to get locked back in. And hopefully that's the case, because he's a great player, a great coach and certainly a great recruiter and a great developer of talent. And, I would like to see him, go and get one of those gigs, Miami of Ohio, DC, or, maybe even something better, maybe a Pitt or something like that, well, maybe not Pitt.
Well, not in our
we went
but
Pitt,
yeah,
but something like that.
But yes,
College,
something at that level.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we can all
just
agree.
Yeah, exactly. Just somewhere you can bring him home here in a couple of years, because hopefully he can be the defensive coordinator. Notre Dame needs to continue to develop young coaches and have some people that are available if you need them. So, all right, moving on with the GM position. It's interesting because James Blanchard's been the name. I don't think anything's changed. We know that he was there this weekend and interviewed, and nothing has happened as of yet as far as official, but sounds like he's probably going to be the guy. But again, I think he has to make his final decision. Um, Here's the interesting thing, and he was a hot topic a couple of years ago when Notre Dame was looking for a GM. Almost came to Notre Dame, and people want to know why that didn't happen. Well, the reason it didn't happen was he wanted complete control. He wanted final say on staffing. He wanted final say on recruiting. Or these are things that I've heard. I don't know this for a fact. This is just what I've heard allegedly. He wanted final say on recruiting, all these things, and I doubt much of that's changed, Jamie. Especially if you're coming back a second time. And it's interesting because you have some conversations with people, and they say, "Well, that's what the GM role is becoming. That's what a lot of these guys are asking for, and asking for and getting are two different things. And so, to me, should a GM have final say on who they offer? Should a GM have final say on who is hired? And I would doubt very much that he would get final say on who is hired. But also, if he had some guys in mind, I'm sure Marcus would say, yeah, let's bring him in here. And as long as nothing's crazy, yeah, let's hire that guy. I'm sure that's the way that's going to go. But when it comes to recruiting, I was talking to Matt about this, and we had a conversation, and there's interesting points on either way, because what happens is sometimes assistant coaches have one foot out the door, right? And I think we've seen this before, Jamie, where guys they're just taking guys because they want recruiting over with, right? They just don't want to deal with it.
We've seen it before. Yeah.
I've seen it before. O-line, seen it at O-line, seen it at D-line, seen it at wide receiver. We've seen it at a number of positions. So there is a reason that you don't want to give the position coach final say on everything, because you don't know whether that person's really dialed in and 100% committed. So I get that. But when you're talking about this position, how much is too much? Your thoughts here?
I think it's a great question. I mean, I definitely think that you don't hire someone to be a in the general manager position and they don't have a lot of say in, shaping the roster in terms of offering.
Amen.
That has to be, you're not going to get anyone really if you don't, or you're not going to get anyone good if you don't give them that autonomy to say hey, we're going to offer this guy hey, you brought me here, I'm scouting someone, this is who I think we should offer him. So I think that stuff is all fine. I just think that and it's something I kind of wrote about last week in Six Thoughts too, is that you want it because that is the thing that he had at Texas Tech with Joey McGuire, where he had very much total control over everything. And he should be able to bring in people that he trusts that are good scouts, whatever. It's why are you hiring this guy unless you do think he can bring in people? So that part was fine. What you don't want to do is, and this is what we've seen with this staff, is this staff, I think, in general, very good evaluators. A lot of and this was the thing why when people were well, Chad Bowden's leaving. Oh no, that's it. And Chad obviously did a good job in a lot of ways and was, super relentless recruiter and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of evaluations, a lot of the big wins in evaluations were coaches who made those calls on guys like Mickens on Leonard Moore, right? A lot of that kind of stuff happened with coaches, Joe Rudolph and Anthony Knapp, all that kind of stuff. So what you don't want to do is take away, give that guy power, give the GM power, whoever it is. If it's Blanchard, great, and you give him power, but don't take away, a strength of the staff, right?
Amen.
Why would you want to do that? That would be a mistake. So, and I don't think Marcus Freeman would make the hire without doing it. I'm sure he's going to give and say, hey, you can offer who you want. And believe me, there's going to be arguments about who they should take in a class or whatever. That is going to be a thing. And I know that they had, even with the, the staff that they've had now, they had arguments with about like, hey, we should take this guy, or nah, this guy's not it, or whatever. And that's going to happen. And it should be, because, opinions matter, right? Like they should be able to go around the room and say it. But when it comes down to it, like Marcus Freeman has to be the voice of it to say like, hey, no, like to James Blanchard, like we got to go with Mick here and Mickens and what he's thinking. Because if Mickens is fighting hard for this guy, then I've been around enough to do it. If, Washington's fighting hard for this guy, I've been around it long enough to know that he's there. So I think that's going to be the ultimate thing there, is that it puts a lot on Freeman to be like, hey, we're going to give you this power to James Blanchard, but we still got to have this. We got to use this for our coaches, especially because so much of Notre Dame's evaluation has been about getting guys in camp and evaluating them in person. And they've done a great job with that. And I think, had some big hits there because of that, but you don't want to take away, that power from those guys. And I think that's super important. Sorry, Greg, what do you got?
Well, no, I want to add on to your point about that. So Leonard Moore, you brought up Leonard Moore as a really good eval from Mike Mickens. He's from Round Rock, Texas, right? So James Blanchard has been at Texas Tech and didn't have a Texas Tech offer. He had a Houston offer. He had a TCU offer. So that's a situation where you got to lean on Mike Mickens for this stuff, right? He knows what he's doing. Leonard Moore did not hold an offer from Texas Tech, didn't have a chance with him. And so, this is where it's like good evaluations, whatever they may be, and I'm sure he has a long track record. Mike Mickens has also a very long and distinguished track record for being able to
of actually coaching that position. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So here's where, because I got into discussions with some people, some fans, and some people about this, and they're like, well, that's what happens in the NFL. Well, like the GM, is above the head coach and can make decisions. And first of all, the GM is there because they want a buffer between the owner and the head coach. That's the whole role of the GM, is the buffer between those two. And then also to run, the day-to-day, everything else that's involved there. So you don't want the head coach necessarily making all the decisions, and you certainly don't want the owner making all the decisions. We've seen what Jerry Jones can do. So, but here's the thing that I don't think people understand about the NFL. You don't become a GM by, being a recruiting guy for 2 or 3 years, in college football. You don't become that in the NFL. You got to earn your stripes in the NFL. You're going to be there 7, 8, 9 years before you escalate and get up to that GM role. It's not something that, all of a sudden this happened. Like Chad, wasn't a GM and then worked in recruiting for a few years, and now all of a sudden he's the GM. That happens, but it's not like something that happens in the NFL where you're just there for 2 years and then you're named the GM. That just doesn't happen very, very often that way. So, and then as you mentioned, there are times where coaches are right, and there are times where other things are right. Like I'll give you an example. I know there's a particular player on Notre Dame's roster that Chad was not a fan of, and one of the coordinators was a big fan of. Well, early returns doesn't sound like this particular player is going to be very good. And so Chad was right on that one, so there are times where this happens, but I've also seen, Jamie, and I've seen this a lot, and I think it's happening more and more, where GMs are taking kids because it makes them look good, because they have the developed relationship with the kid. So when that happens and they land the kid, everybody's like, oh, well, this guy did such a great job recruiting him. He's a great GM. And it's like, well, yeah, but you may have been able to have somebody else who's better. The only reason he's here is because it makes X player or X GM look good, and so, Yeah, it's crazy. You know, a lot of guys have egos and things like that. And you got to be real careful about when you're hiring. You know, I think certain guys you want to have huge egos because that's part of what the deal is. And there's certain guys that you don't want to have huge egos and how to handle it. But I think the real thing for me would be Marcus Freeman should have final say on what happens on literally everything. And here's the reason why. Because Marcus Freeman can say, okay, say the GM wants this guy and the coordinator doesn't, right? Marcus Freeman can go to the coordinator and say, well, what is your big problem with him, right? The GM wants him and he thinks he's really good. And the coordinator says, you know what, I don't like this about him and I don't think he fits in with us because of this. Then Marcus Freeman makes a decision and he can be the bad guy. That's what the being the boss is. You got to be the bad guy sometimes. You just do.
You got to make the decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I don't think you want to put too much power in one person's hands. I just don't think it's a good situation. And I hope Notre Dame doesn't do that. I don't think that that's what's going to happen here, but I know that this is stuff that a lot of people are asking for in these GM roles. When it comes to personnel and hiring people, I get it. You want to bring in the best people and this and that, but let's just say Blanchard's the guy. Is it okay for Blanchard to go in and fire everybody in the recruiting office because he doesn't like them and bring in his own people? Well, if that's okay, then why can't Chris Ash, if he doesn't like the coaches that are coaching for him, why can't he go in there and fire everybody? And these are, I guess the difference is because a lot of these guys are making, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 where the recruiting guys are making 70. It's a little bit less of a hit, paying a 2-year contract for 500,000 versus 70,000. So, but I mean, these are things that if I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm like, why is this guy going to go in there and clean house and I don't get to? So these are all things that you have to think about as a head coach, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. All right, Jamie, we got, spring practice. And here's the thing. I think Notre Dame's going to be in good shape. I like the fact they got Ash in here pretty early. Mike Denbrock came in kind of late last year, if you remember. Didn't get a whole lot of time to kind of – and I think Ash is going to have a little bit more time to kind of get his feet wet. Denbrock had to come in here and he barely knew the roster at all. You know what I mean? So he didn't even know what he was looking at and found out during spring practice – with Ash, he'll have a good amount of time to kind of go through, watch film on all of the players, kind of get updated on what he has. And I think that that's going to help a little bit as well. Jared Parker, when he was a guy, he had literally no time. He knew the team because he'd been coaching there, but it's just completely different when all of a sudden you're the coordinator. So, anyway, I think spring practice, they should be fine. I think Ash will have enough time to kind of get familiar with everybody. Your thoughts here?
Oh, yeah. He's going to have plenty of time to get familiar with them. And there's like more. The players now, too, where before, and I know they have rules against like how much contact and how much coaching you can do, too. But like it is such like a all year thing now, and not just with workouts. And obviously workouts are like a thing, which is it's so I know there was a question about it from ISC customers about when workouts start and whatever, and I don't even actually really know like what's going on specifically with that, because things are different because they played so much deeper into the season. But they're working out. Like they're working out. They might just not be doing the intensity of what they're doing is probably a lot different, especially for the guys too, that like are just new to the program and just coming in. And then the guys that like are, played on a sprained ankle for, months or whatever, right? Like those guys, it's different and they're going to have to adjust to that. But like, there's so much of things where like, players are so proactive now about like, hey, I want to like watch film and I want to like learn this and I want to do that. And that's part of what makes, what has made Notre Dame so good on defense, over the last probably like 7 years or whatever, is they've had a bunch of guys that are like football junkies that like want to go and study and learn and do this. And like, believe me, it's not going to be like guys walking into spring practice and being like, well, this is the first time that I've ever kind of seen this. It's like, no, they give them it. They do like independent study on their own. They're going to watch like a ton of film. And yeah, it might be limited how much they can actually do stuff with the coaches, but like, I mean, they're going to get guidance there and figure stuff out. So, I mean, I just think of where the guy with the amount of guys that are returning that already have like the kind of like work habits that are really like someone like Drake Bowen, who's already was like a guy who like really put a ton into like film study. Now he's obviously not going to play baseball this semester too. Like, I guarantee some of these guys are so motivated after getting so close to winning championship too, that they like dove right back in. And
yeah,
so I think a lot of guys are going to they're going to be way more advanced than you would ever think early on in spring with that adjustment, because of the type of people and the type of players that are already on campus for Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The healing of injuries, all that type of stuff. When you play this long, it just takes a while, and you got more opportunities for more injuries too when you play this many games. So, hopefully they'll be able to handle it and everything and be good to go. All right, let's get to questions. We got a lot of questions from ISD customers. We'll try and hit through them pretty quick because we got a bunch of them. Can you please explain the evolving role of GMs at the college level, college football? How do you see it working out for ND? We kind of just discussed that, but again, I think it's a situation where, you got to look at the GM he's the roster guy. So he's going to have evaluators under him, guys, and he'll do some evaluation as well, where they're looking for players, and they're, through recruiting and through the portal. And so they had, that's part of the role. Part of the role is handling the NIL part of it. How much money goes to who and when, and negotiating with agents and that type of stuff. That's certainly a part of it as well. And, there's just a lot of different pieces that go into this, and it's kind of an expanding, thing. What I think is the smart thing to do here. And I think sometimes, because, you're just trying to learn how this role is evolving, that, like say Chad, who obviously did a good job, probably had too many hats on his head at the time. You can't do everything really well. What you need to do is find people who are very good at specific things and put them in that role. And then the GM needs to manage that position. But you can't have your GM be your lead recruiting guy, also your lead evaluator of talent, your lead, I'm going to, meaning when I say recruiting guy, the main person on the phone talking to these people all the time, but also got to schedule all this type of stuff, going to get transcripts, who's handling the travel, who's doing all these little minutia things. You can't have one person doing all that. And he certainly was, and he had people under him. But I think what I'm hoping we'll see moving forward with Blanchard coming in is expanding the role of, or the scope of GMs, meaning you will have to hire more people to take on some of these roles that, maybe Chad was trying to do too much or was forced to do too much because they just didn't have people in all those roles. So I'm hoping that that's what we're going to see with this and move forward. All right. Do you anticipate any more additions in the portal in the spring opening? Again, I think that's going to depend on what they think of some players in the spring. Ash is going to get a good look at some of these young defensive linemen. I have a feeling if some guys, a couple guys don't really kind of materialize, they'll probably be gone. Whether that's, by their own decision or pushed out, same thing with a lot of different positions. Could be some O-linemen, all that type of thing. And we don't know what's going to happen at quarterback either. Could all of a sudden we have a mass exodus at quarterback. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible we'll see some more people being added in the spring, for summer and for fall. As far as the junior day, wants to know how that went. To to be honest with Jamie, I think that they've been pretty focused on trying to fill these roles. I don't think that I'm sure they're still doing some recruiting, but I don't think it's been priority number one at this point. I think filling these roles. So I don't think they've got a great feedback on all these guys at this point, but we'll see. News on Blanchard we've addressed, assuming Rudolph is staying. Yeah, Rudolph. I mean, as I mentioned on the board, this idea that he interviewed with the Bears, that didn't happen. He wasn't even called. So, I just think it's some bad reporting type of thing. So I'm not concerned about that. Guy wants to know about Brennan Vernon. Can he make and move and contribute? Also, do you see him moving from DE to do you think that moving him from defensive end to defensive tackle stunted his development? Yeah, I don't know. I would say early returns have not been real positive as far as his growth. Some guys take a bit of time. Jason Onye was one. He was a guy that took a little bit of time, and then suddenly things started materializing. But I'd put Onye, wouldn't you? I'd put on not Onye, Vernon in that group. That hey, you got to make a move now. If you don't this spring, you're probably not going to play here.
Oh yeah, it's a make or break spring for him for sure. Yeah. And I think
Houston as well. I'd say.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Both those guys. I think that when you get into that year after year 2, going into year 3, if you aren't taking a step toward like being at the very least being in the rotation on the defensive line, then that's probably done for you, because you're just going to get passed by, right? There's going to be guys that they recruit that were there. And frankly, like I know so many people were like, where's Vernon? And I mean, he's a guy who gets asked about it a ton because of his ranking. But like, when guys get on campus, who cares about the ranking anymore? Like it doesn't matter. Well, so Cole Mullins was not a highly ranked guy, and he had to make the adjustment from playing. He was playing as an off the ball linebacker, and he had to make the adjustment.
And he was injured.
Yeah. So he made a better. So I know it is an adjustment. Believe me, I was a guy who was a linebacker that was a defensive end my freshman year. And then all of a sudden I show up one day and they told me that I see my name and it's nose guard. And I was like, well, I guess I got to gain 40 pounds, But that's one of the things that, it happens and it is an adjustment. I definitely completely understand what that adjustment is, but it's like, you got to show progress with that adjustment. And as far as we've seen, he didn't show that. And I think I don't think it was a mistake moving him for defensive end, because I always kind of thought he should be a defensive tackle anyways.
I agree.
And he's not someone, especially at defensive end, if you watched him and his film, he was a guy who was very good at the point of attack, just like, winning and being a strong guy. And they said when he was, when he came in as a freshman, they were like, he's violent, right? Like he's violent off the ball, but he's not like a dynamic athlete, a guy who's got like bend and get to the court. Like, so he's a guy who's going to win with power. And it made sense to move him inside. And also they had a need at 3-tech. There would have been opportunities for him this year. Look at all the injuries and stuff they had at defensive tackle. Like he should have been prime to do it. And the other thing is, if they thought he was like, hey, who's better off at defensive end, they would have moved him back and then he would have whatever. So I think everyone who's like kind of hoping that, this is like the thing for Brandon Vernon, he's going to make it, like, I think not that you should give up hope or whatever, but just don't have any expectations for it, because it's whatever he's going to be this spring, that will determine his whole future at Notre Dame and whether or not he's still at Notre Dame, because he has to make a move. He has to make a move. If he comes into spring and he's 280 pounds at defensive tackle, he's probably not. That's probably it for him. It's just what it is. Like he has to be at a certain thing, because he's not like Cross or Heinisch or whatever in terms of quickness or anything either, right? So it's like he needs to be like 290 plus. He needs to like come out with like a total vengeance. He needs to like totally understand everything technique wise, be like absolutely on it with everything assignment wise with the defense. And if he's there and he's making steps, then he'll get in the mix because there's going to be opportunities there. He just got to take advantage of.
Yeah. Yeah, so Brian Shaw says that Brad Biggs is incredibly reliable. Rudolph definitely interviewed with the Bears. It's not true. I know the guy who was with Rudolph that day. No, it's not true. I'm sorry. It just, I don't know why people get into this, but it is what it is. Okay, let's see. What about, or we just talked about Vernon. There are a few younger players who've have yet to contribute. We hear a lot about Carr, Cam Williams, Gerby Lambert, Micah Gilbert, for example. Outside of those few, who are guys that you think are young guys that could be on the move here? For me, I think Kedron Young would be one. I think Logan Saldate would be another guy to take keep an eye out for. I've heard good things about Styles Prescott before he got hurt. So it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of make some noise this spring and see what happens, with obviously with Rocco and Coogan gone, there's still a lot of bodies there, but some guys are going to get some second team opportunities and we'll have to see what happens. Logan Thomas, I think, is a guy that we'll have to see what happens with, hopefully he has a big spring, because we're not 100% sure yet on what's going to happen with Boubacar Traore and Jordan Botelho. So, hopefully he's having a big spring here, and we'll see what happens. Another guy I think is Tay Johnson and Kennedy Urlacher. I think those are two other guys that to kind of keep an eye on that could be making some noise this spring. So, next question, will Jabron Payne be full go in the spring, and any word on his recovery? I haven't heard anything. He was hurt at the end of spring in the spring game. So, he's probably around the time where they'll probably let him do things, right? Get him out there and see what he does. I don't know. It'll be interesting because I think he's going to have a hard time seeing the field. I just do. And he's a good back. He is a good back. He looked really good in that spring, not just the spring game. Spring, yeah. He really did. So he's a good back, but Kedron Young is going to be charging hard and there's a lot of bodies there. It's going to be very hard to try and overcome and we'll just have to see what happens. All right. New coordinators sometimes mean some players ascend who have stagnated. Who are some of the top candidates that could take advantage of that? There's a lot of guys who could, but Jamie, any thoughts here?
I don't know, because I think for the most part, guys, what we've seen is most guys have kind of been on track, like have taken the necessary steps every year. So, yeah. I guess it would be a guy like Vernon, someone like that, right? But like, he's got the same position coach. Nick Sebastian's back with Al Washington too. Like it's going to be more about him than anything that changes within the scheme or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know if they're specific because the rest of the staff is the same. I think, when it's a coordinator, unless it's like a quarterback or something like that, I think it's more about the position coach, because it's the position coach you get in. It's like, that's the guy who's like, it's fresh eyes on you every day. That's just like, someone that you can, the previous position coach maybe had an idea about you and maybe your work ethic, maybe how you did things or how he thought, man, this guy's never going to be a player. Well, now there's somebody brand new that you get to kind of, hey, I get a chance to prove to this guy. Right. So, and they just haven't had that changes. So I don't really know if there's anyone that is. Well,
Ash is going to rely heavily on his position coaches and say, who are the players here, And so he's going to get the same opinion, that the assistant coaches already have. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have.
Oh, well, looked like Mike cut off there. So, I'm sure he'll be back in a second, but
I'll pop in for you, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, but I would say you'd probably agree with that, Greg, right? That like the position coach when they come in, that's what it's about. Sometimes I think when there's like a new GA or like a new analyst or something like
Yeah.
that, that can actually make a pretty big difference when there is somebody there who comes in and it's just someone, it's a new
Yeah.
voice coming in, and just maybe they connect with you like the other coaches haven't. And they
Just a
can get
little bit more patience for something, or they see something in a
they see
player
something
that,
in you, yeah.
yeah, they see something in a player that they want to kind of develop, right? And another coach maybe just didn't see it, or they didn't want to see it, or it just different styles. Different coaches have different styles, and that sort of thing. So, welcome back, Mike.
All right, sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. So I was trying to switch to the questions. Okay, question about the ACC schedule and playing two of Clemson, FSU, and Miami every year. Do you like that idea? Look, man, I if I'm Notre Dame, man, I don't know why subject yourself to this, and unless there's things that
Is that for
change.
sure what it's going to be, though? Play
This is
twice
what
in one
I
year?
think this is what the ACC wants in order to keep FSU, Miami, and Clemson happy. But why does Notre Dame have to do that? Why would you do that? I mean, why put more? I think a lot of people want better games and things like that. So I get that. But at the same time, why put more roadblocks in front of you? If Notre Dame, let's just say Notre Dame played a 9-3 FSU, you get a chance to lose. But if you beat 9-3 FSU, now they're 9-4, and everybody's going to be saying the same thing about Notre Dame as they were this year, which is they didn't play anybody. FSU's 9-4. That's not a big win. So what's the point? If I'm Notre Dame, I'm like, you know what? No, we don't have to do that. That's not what our contract says. We don't have to do what you want us to do. I would tell them no. I really would. Why make it harder to get to the college football playoff? Doesn't make sense. I wouldn't do it. Your thoughts?
You know what? I was thinking that initially when I heard it, but the more that I think about it, like I just think all three of those programs are so volatile. I mean, obviously Clemson, you can't say Clemson is volatile because I mean they win 10 games every year, right? But I'm just saying, like, it does seem like they're not where they were. They're not like the superpower that they were.
Yeah.
And I think, you know what? Hey, Clemson,
But you don't gain
Miami,
anybody
Florida,
by
come,
beating
come on down to South Bend. Come on down to South Bend because they're going to lose, which they have. When all those teams come to up to Indiana, they lose, right? And obviously, it's hard for Notre Dame when they have to do it. But also, I just think that there is something to, which is, and maybe this is old school Notre Dame fandom in me from back in the day, Mike, where Notre Dame was just like, yeah, you know what, we'll play anybody and we'll just do this. And there was very much like a, that was the attitude of like kind of like scheduling that way. Like, because I just think I was thinking about Lincoln Riley and what a coward Lincoln Riley is for him being like, well, maybe we shouldn't play Notre Dame anymore because I don't know if it's good for whatever. It's just like, okay, man, you're going to be the guy who tries to get rid of the Notre Dame USC rivalry because, like, you don't want to travel to Rutgers and all this because the travels is a little bit too much. Like, come on. When Pete Carroll was just destroying Notre Dame year after year, he wasn't talking about dropping Notre Dame. Get your program to that level, and then you don't care about playing those games, right? And so 2 every year, I think is maybe too much. I'd say maybe if you did like one of those
Sure,
teams
one
every
of them,
year, I
that's
think that's
fine.
totally
Yeah,
fine.
but why do you have to
and then
play
maybe
both?
like maybe a couple years you bring in both. And I also think that isn't a bad thing for, like, revenue wise, it is a good thing for Notre Dame and the league to have that kind of, attention, because I think actually one of the things that kind of, it helped that they went on this run here and people thought Notre Dame was legit, but like people didn't think Notre Dame was legit because they just didn't have a schedule where there was like, how many people tuned in to see them beat the crap out of Army? Like it wasn't the same. So, I don't know. And maybe this was just a rare exception of a year that it won't matter. But I do think, like, Notre Dame's got to have at least like 3 high profile games a year. And obviously they didn't have that this year.
I don't see the reward for doing it, right? I mean, if Notre Dame beats a good FSU team, I guess if they're 11 wins or 12 wins or something like that, yeah, there's a reward for it, right? But I just don't have a lot of faith FSU or Miami are going to be consistent 9, 10, 11 win team. But they're going to be dangerous enough to beat you. So I just don't see the reward in it. I really don't. And nobody's rewarded Notre Dame anything. It's nobody's given you anything. So why should you give something to them? And everybody's doing everything they can to kind of keep them out in a certain way. So why make it harder for your head coach? That's just the way I look at it. I mean, you look at the Big 12 right now, right? And every head coach would love to have the Big 12 schedule as long as you're the best team in the Big 12. You know what I mean? Because you can have that schedule and they can't blame you. You're like, look, this is the Big 12. I'm sorry that this is the best teams we have, but this is our schedule. You guys have already made this contract and this is the way it's going to be. So unless something changes, sorry, we're a Big 12 champs and we deserve one of these slots. And, I think that's going to change in the end, but I think every coach would love to be in that situation where if you could dominate the Big 12, then you're in a pretty good position to begin with. So I don't know. We'll see as it moves forward. Let's see. Who's the best candidates for the next commitment? I'm not sure we really have anybody that's even close, Jamie. I don't
think so. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, because
I think Jacoby Clapper likes Notre Dame a lot. I think it's a guy that they have a really good shot at, but I don't think he's going to decide anytime soon.
He might be like late spring or even summer.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the guys, I think, and I just think in general, most of the guys right now, Merrill wasn't someone that I thought like, well, he's going to decide right after that until it happened, right? Until right before it happened. So, it can always change, but I don't think there's going to be too many. I wouldn't expect anyone to make a decision before we get into spring ball here. Like I think Notre Dame's trending in a good way for a lot of these guys, but like, let's think about like the junior day they just had and they made a good impression with these guys. Well, there's other teams having junior days too. And these guys are going to those junior days as well, right? Like they're still going around and checking things out. And that's just, just that time of year, right?
A lot of things can change. Absolutely. All right, Guy wants to know who hires the assistants to the position coaches, meaning Moon went to the Bengals with Golden. Who decides who replaces him? Well, that's Marcus Freeman. He decides that. As far as who hires, like the staff that went, or with Bowden, that would be the new GM with Marcus's approval. I think is the way that's going to go. So as far as like I think a lot of people said, well, Zaire losing her was that's not a big loss. I'm sorry. I just I don't know. I haven't heard like she was a big part of the reason why they had any success. Now did she have a role? Of course she did. Just like everybody else does. But I think losing somebody like Caleb would be way worse than losing somebody like her. So I think that people need to kind of know who is, if you lose Caleb, that's something you got to be worried about. So why is there little or no mention of Cam Williams? We barely heard about him on years. Is he on pace? We've mentioned this many, many times. And it boils down to this. And he's even said it in interviews. He was not advanced mentally in the game of football. Where he was at, they didn't have the kind of offense and they didn't face the kind of defense. And he is just not that educated right now in what he needs to do out there. It takes time for somebody like him to learn this. That's been the problem all along. Like, he didn't know coverages very well, didn't know what he was looking at and where he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to do. And, as we've seen many times when there's a miscommunication, Jamie, one guy's going one way, the quarterback throws to another spot thinking that's where he's going to go, and the ball's picked off. You can't have that. You can't have that. So that's really the entirety of why he hasn't played. And he's got to get better at it. I know he's working on it. By all accounts, he's very happy at Notre Dame. And they expect him to be somebody very, very good. Whether that happens this year or not, I don't know. But because there's so many bodies there right now. But if he does get it down, he has the kind of speed that it's going to be hard to keep him off the field. So, again, we had another question about guys buried on the depth chart. Will they get I don't think that they'll get much of a chance. I mean, I shouldn't say that. They'll get a chance to prove it, but I don't think much is going to change. I think they're there because of their situation, not I don't think there's any coach holding them down on the depth chart. I think they're just there because they're just not as good as the other guys right now. All right. Do you know if Chris Burgess is being recruited to play strong side defensive end or Viper? Well, he's strong defensive end now. Jamie and I think that he has the body that could grow into a defensive tackle. But then when I watched him in the Navy All-American game, he looked pretty good rushing the passer there, Jamie. That's the best I've seen him look. I was real impressed. Much better than I anticipated. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, no, I think he made easily the biggest jump out of any of the recruits, I think, in like the whole entire class from his junior to senior season. You could just kind of see the light just kind of clicked on for him. And part of it was how he was used. But there were things that you saw from him because he's been someone who's obviously been into a bunch of Notre Dame's camps and worked there. And he looked different in camp than he looked on film. And so you're like, that's there, but why isn't it translating? But you could really see it translate. And also, too, he was someone that when I saw when he was like a sophomore in high school, and I thought, man, this guy's going to be a defensive tackle. But then he didn't really get as big as I thought he was going to get over that course of that time. And not that he's going to be a big dude, but I just don't think when I first saw him, I thought, oh man, this guy might end up being 290.
That's
and
what
I don't know if he's going to be
75 is probably his max right now.
Yeah, so I think he will probably stay at around that and be like a strong side end.
Really,
I bet I think he's someone who has a chance to be really, really good for Notre Dame. He's someone
very long arms, yes,
long,
could
twitchy,
be very good,
and just yeah.
Any updates on Styles Prescott? I've not heard much other than, he's battling back and from injury. And like I said before, I think that he impressed some people with his agility and his ability to pass protect and that type of thing. We'll see what happens and go from there. Notre Dame does have 3 offensive linemen committed. We've talked about them, their guards, but we did a story today on Felix Ojo. I'm a big fan of Felix Ojo. Man,
that's good.
Oh my gosh. I want Felix Ojo big time. You go watch his film. That guy's a really, really talented player. And I like the guys that got committed and things like that, but I think you need to continue to get those elite tackle prospects, and he's an elite tackle prospect. I think he's very underrated, and I really like his potential. Moves very, very well, but also plays violently, really plays violently for a guy, that's more of a tackle, and I don't want to say a finesse guy, but he moves so well that a lot of people think, more Ronnie Stanley than Mike McGlinchey, but he's got a lot of McGlinchey in him too. He'll hurt you. So I really like his potential. Speaking of which, before we close the show, real quick, any of these 2026 guys that you really like?
I mean, I'm still kind of like, I should mention too that I'm like, things got delayed because obviously Notre Dame played a way longer season than they've ever played. So I'm finishing the final ISD Fab 50 for 2025 right now. So I am going through all that right now too. So in addition to kind of like watching the 2026 kids, I am a big fan. Obviously, Mike, I'm a defensive line guy. I really like Tiki Hola. I'm a big Tiki Hola guy. I think he is a stud.
What they're
I
missing,
think he's just like a guy, exactly what they're kind of missing there.
Yeah.
And he's someone who is, he's about 270 right now, but he's going to be easily over 300 and going to be like a force. And he plays with like violence. With
and he's
his
interested
and just leverage. Yes. And
so here's the thing, Jamie.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. They need to pay him. All right. Because
at that position,
look,
yes.
You just don't get many of these kids that are that talented that are interested. So pay him. Pay him. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I hope that they pay him. I hope that because there's just not that many of them. So I hope that they give him a nice NIL offer if if it becomes a situation down the road, which I think it is. I do think he has a legit 100% interest and we'll see what happens. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
I agree. I do. I will say you mentioned him already. I really like Jacoby Clapper. I think he's a stud. Like I think
like him too. Yeah.
He's just one of these guys that just knows how to play linebacker. Like he's just got just like a feel for it. Like you can see him slip blocks. You see him block destruction. You see his instincts. I think he's going to be a really good player. So that's a guy too that I'm a fan of. I like who they brought. I really like who they brought in the junior day in general.
Yeah, I like all those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's like a number of those guys that I think that would be awesome players in the class for them. Those guys kind of stand out for me out of like the most recent, junior day, out of the guys that if you said like, hey, who are the two kind of like favorites from that group, which I could probably list like 5-6 favorites, but those two guys kind of stand out at the top for me.
Yeah. All right, folks, that's going to be it for the show. Hope you enjoyed that. Wanted to mention once again, check us out on YouTube. Search for Irish Sports Daily. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and like the videos. That helps us a great deal, and it'll also allow you to know when we're live broadcasting, and also it'll put all our videos on your feed. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and like it. If you're listening online or listening, just through a podcast, you can also check us online live as well. So thanks for listening, folks. We will talk to you next week on Power Hour, and hopefully we'll be talking about a new GM and a whole bunch more recruiting stuff, and we'll take your questions as well. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll talk to you next week on Power Hour.